Picture this. You are the President of the United States. You've taken an hour-long phone call with the President of Russia, the man who launched a cyber war against the United States in an attempt to dictate the outcome of the presidential election in which you became president. What might be your big takeaways from that conversation? And what might you want the country that you're ostensibly leading to know about it? If you're Donald Trump, it's that the Russian president smiled during the call.
Mr. President, did you address the election meddling issues that came up in the Mueller report with Mr. Putin today?
We discussed it. He actually sort of smiled when he said something to the effect that it started off as a mountain and it ended up being a mouse. But he knew that because he knew there was no collusion whatsoever. So pretty much that's what it was.
He actually sort of smiled. That was the actual scene today in the Oval Office, where Donald Trump, speaking to reporters, or more like speaking at them, recounted a call he had this morning with Vladimir Putin. The White House actually had to clarify later that it wasn't a video call, so it's not clear how Trump knew Putin was smiling. Maybe he just felt it in his spirit. Now, we could think of one reason why Putin might be smiling during that phone call.
Mr. President, did you tell him not to meddle in the next election?
Excuse me, I'm answering this question. You are very rude. So we had a good conversation about many different things, okay?
Did you ask
tell
him
him
not to
meddle in the next election?
We didn't discuss that. Really, we didn't discuss it.
Robert Mueller's 22-month-long investigation concluded that, quote, the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion, and that the Trump campaign sought to benefit from what Russia did. The fact that the president apparently has no time or interest confronting Vladimir Putin about Russian meddling in future American elections should raise alarm bells. And it's not just because, per 2 years of reporting, Trump will do almost anything to avoid talking about Russian interference, because it makes him feel insecure about the legitimacy of his election. And per that reporting, White House officials have been only too happy to oblige. The New York Times reported last week that then Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen was instructed not to bring up Russian interference in Trump's presence, even as she was tasked with ensuring the security of the 2020 elections. And one former senior intelligence official told the Washington Post in 2017 that mentions of Russian interference take meetings with Trump, quote, off the rails. One explanation for this is that despite the unanimous agreement of his own intelligence services and a 400-plus page report from the special counsel, Trump simply doesn't believe Russian interference happened, apparently because, per his solicitous performance in Helsinki last year, Putin told him so.
I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be. I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
The more alarming explanation is that, again, as was detailed in the Mueller report, Trump's campaign sought to benefit from Russian interference. The Mueller report detailed how Russia's Facebook efforts reached more than 100 million people, targeting voters they hoped would disenfranchise themselves by staying home and not voting. Mueller wrote about how Russia organized pro-Trump rallies and attempted to find numerous points of contact on the Trump campaign. You'd think a president not seeking to benefit from that kind of activity again in 2020 might view the release of the Mueller report as an ideal opportunity to readdress the issue with Putin, to get tough and show the country that whatever you think of his campaign in 2016, a Donald Trump administration will not stand for any kind of interference in our election. You'd think. But as the Washington Post's Aaron Blake writes, none of that was apparently worthy of Trump's time when he had a chance to talk to the man who U.S. intelligence says was behind it all. Clearly, though, there's something that Trump wanted to talk about with Putin. The Kremlin said that the conversation was at Trump's initiative, and Russian news agency TASS, which released this photo of Putin during his call with Trump, reported that, quote, the conversation lasted for almost 1.5 hours. If that reporting is true, then Donald Trump had nearly 90 minutes to confront Vladimir Putin and warn him not to interfere in our elections. And Trump didn't say a thing. And so the question we're left with tonight is why not?
Getting along with Russia and China, getting along with all of them is a very good thing. Not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's a positive thing. Getting along with other countries, including your country, by the way. But getting along with countries is a good thing. And we want to have good relationships with every country.
Leading off our discussion tonight, Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence, Evelyn Farkas, Senior Fellow at the German Marshall Fund, and a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, and Eugene Robinson, Associate Editor and Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for The Washington Post. All three are MSNBC analysts. Thank you all for being here. Actually, I'm going to start with you, Frank, because there are two ways to think of Donald Trump's refusal to confront Vladimir Putin regarding the attack on our election in 2016. One, per Helsinki, he just doesn't believe it happened, so he doesn't think it's important. Or two, the more sinister explanation, he wants to benefit from it again. When you look at Donald Trump's behavior in the Oval Office today and what he said, which of those seems more plausible to you?
Many of us have been asking the question, why? Why would you be on the phone for an hour with the Russian leader and not bring this up in a very firm way? Think of the political capital the president could have gained with voters beyond his base, Joy, if he simply said, I brought it up, I chastised him, I threatened him with additional sanctions. But he didn't do that. Many voters would have said, hey, he's doing the right thing. He's trying to make sure this doesn't happen again for the good of the country. So I'm left to this conclusion, Joy. As you say, it's not because he doesn't think that it happened. It's not because he's not believing the intelligence community. And it's also not because he thinks it happened, but it didn't change the outcome of the election. I'm convinced that he's fearful that he thinks it happened and it might have actually impacted the outcome of the election. And he is okay with that happening again. That's the only conclusion that I can see here that makes sense to me. And so he's essentially silence is assent. If you're not bringing it up with Putin, you're essentially giving him the green light. And as with other mob bosses and that mentality, when you are silent, when you give someone the look, the nod, you're essentially saying, keep doing it.
Yeah, and, Evelyn Farkas, the challenge with an alternative explanation to what you just heard Frank articulate is that Donald Trump has been shown over the years to pretty much like anybody he thinks likes him, and to think that anyone who's on his side is on the good side, and that's the way he sort of delineates the world in this binary way. Well, let's go back to Helsinki. Here is Vladimir Putin saying in his own words what he wanted to happen in 2016.
President Putin, did you want President Trump to win the election, and did you direct any of your officials to help him do that?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Because he talked about bringing the U.S.-Russia relationship back to normal.
And then here is Trump today, tweeting about his call with Putin. As I've always said long before the witch hunt started, getting along with Russia, China, and everyone is a good thing, not a bad thing. We discussed trade, Venezuela, Ukraine, North Korea, nuclear arms control, and even the Russian hoax. Very productive talk. So Donald Trump knows that Vladimir Putin wanted him to be president. He knows that there was a big report saying that Vladimir Putin took action to help him be president. And he says getting along with Russia, top priority for him. He's getting what he wants. How else to interpret it that Donald Trump is open to a repeat?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speculate too much, but everything Frank said and what you said makes sense, Joy. I think the thing to be disturbed about is, regardless of his motive, Donald Trump is playing with fire, because Vladimir Putin is a risk-taking leader who thinks that Donald Trump and America is weak. I spent some time this week with a Russian former oligarch who no longer lives in Russia. I'm not going to say who it was. He talked very openly about the fact that Putin himself is politically at a weak point. Internally, domestically, which, of course, always makes Putin then look for a way to distract his people. And that is usually what he does, is he takes some sort of international military action. We see him in Venezuela, and I don't know if you're going to get to that later in the conversation, but, Putin lied to Trump about Venezuela, and he apparently accepted the lie, just as he did in Helsinki about the interference in our elections. So I think the problem here is that, regardless of the motive, our president is playing with fire, because Vladimir Putin is a man who sees President Trump and America as weak, And Vladimir Putin himself is weak, and when he is weak, he lashes out. And that could present a lot of danger for us and our allies.
And just to stay with you just for a moment, Evelyn, because we know now that North Korea has fired off yet another missile. Donald Trump keeps saying that he solved the problem on the Korean Peninsula. He claims that Vladimir Putin apparently is advising him on what to do, but that's what happened today.
Right. And they just met, Joy. So President Putin just met with Kim Jong-un this past week. God knows what they discussed. The one thing we know they discussed was probably sanctions, because Putin came out with a statement saying we should find a way in exchange for North Korea's good behavior. He didn't use that language, but basically good faith actions. We should find a way to relieve the sanctions. Well, North Korea hasn't taken any good faith actions. I mean, except for maybe the long-range ballistic missile, you know, the fact that they're not conducting those tests right now. But as you just said, they conducted a short-range test. This is the second one in a matter of a week or so. They're clearly signaling to our government that they want President Trump to make more concessions.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what President Putin wants as well.
And Eugene Robinson, I don't get it just from a standpoint of a president seeking re-election. This all makes him look quite weak. You have the Kremlin putting out readouts of his interactions with Vladimir Putin that are more detailed than what we get from the White House. You have Donald Trump being taken for a ride on Venezuela, taken for a ride on North Korea, and essentially sort of acting like he's the junior partner in this new partnership with Vladimir Putin. I don't get it just from a political standpoint. Do you?
No, I don't, and I fear. I mean, I'm not sure this is the case, but all of you may be making far too much sense and being far too logical about this. Well, one thing we should take into account when we talk about President Trump is not just his venality and his ignorance and all the other things that make him unfit, but also his massive narcissism. And at some level, I think he probably understands full well that Vladimir Putin's massive interference in the election quite likely put him over the top. I think he understands that, and I think he cannot admit that. He cannot stand to have that it talked about in his presence. He cannot stand to acknowledge it publicly. He certainly can't acknowledge it to Putin, with whom he has this sort of almost junior partner relationship that is weird, but that has been pretty consistent. He has always seemed to look up to Putin. Hard to do when he's 6'2" and Putin's about 5'7", but he looks up to him.
Yeah, and Frank, what might a foreign intelligence service then make of an American president who seems to want to make himself the underling of the Russian president, who, to Evelyn's point, isn't even a strong president at this point? What might a foreign intelligence service do in that stead when you have an election coming up?
Well, rest assured, other foreign intelligence services are monitoring this very, very closely. They've done a personality assessment, and they're seeing, as Eugene is saying, this kind of illogical behavior that they will try to capitalize on. So you can compromise this president by merely making him think that you're helping him. And if you do that in the context of the upcoming 2020 elections, let's say China, let's say pick your country, decides to let him know with a wink and a nod, we're helping, we're behind you, we're going to do some social media propaganda, we might do some hacking. They've got him. They've got him, they own him, and rest assured, we're going to see them try to do that unless our defenses are in place.
And Eugene, all of that then comes in the context of an Attorney General of the United States who could not say with clarity that anything that Frank just described would be illegal or would even be wrong.
Right. It was astounding. Certainly not. Basically, as I understand Attorney General Barr's position, the president cannot be held accountable. He certainly could not be held accountable if for winking and nodding and sort of welcoming the next round of Russian interference. It was an astounding performance the other day, and it's a sad state that our Justice Department seems to be in under William Barr, but that's where we are.
Yep, it's going to be an interesting election. Eugene Robinson, Evelyn Farkas, Frank Figliuzzi, thank you all very much.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.